What's up, everybody? My name is Josh LefeWare, and I run a successful cloud and data consulting firm based out of Houston, Texas. I moved from Canada to the USA in late 2022. And in this video, I wanted to talk about why I made this move, as well as some of the mistakes that I made along the way so that I can hopefully prevent you from making the same. So first up, I wanted to talk about my motivations behind this giant move. In 2019, the pandemic had just hit Canada. I was living in Montreal, Quebec, and it was considered the epicenter for the pandemic. This likely had something to do with the underground rail system where there were a lot of people in a tight, confined space. Our cases were extremely high. As a result, the lockdowns were crazy. We had no gyms, no restaurants, no movie theaters, no events whatsoever for nearly 2 years. We were essentially prisoners in our own homes. We weren't allowed to see family. And at one point, the pandemic got so bad in Montreal that if we were caught outside after a certain hour and we weren't going to work or we weren't going to the grocery store or the pharmacy, you could literally get a $2,000 fine. Needless to say, I wanted to get the heck out of there. On top of this, Quebec, where I was living, has some of the highest marginal tax rates in all of North America. In fact, our tax rates can go up to 53.5%. And at the time, my business was doing extremely well, and I was starting to reach some of those higher tax brackets. I felt like I was being penalized for being more ambitious and having that drive. Also, most of my clientele that I was working with through my business was now located in the US, and with the borders closed, it made traveling to go see them very, very difficult. Luckily, we were still able to do most of our business through Zoom. These were my big motivations at the time. And as you'll see throughout this video, they very quickly changed over time once I got to the US and learned a few things. In order to move to the US, I applied for what's called an E2 Treaty Investor Visa. This visa was one of the most difficult visas to obtain. However, it allowed me up to 5 years in the US. In addition, it was extremely easy to renew. And then finally, it allowed me to bring my business into the US. Now, there were some stipulations behind this visa. I had to open a new business in the US. I had to write a very clear and concise business plan explaining what the next 5 years of my visa looked like. I had to hire US employees, and I had to make a $100,000 minimum investment into the US economy. I assume that all of this was in the hopes that me moving to the US would help boost their economy. Makes sense. Opening a business in the US while not being a resident of the US was extremely challenging. There were a lot of pitfalls that I fell into there. I also had to open a business bank account. Again, challenging, especially because the borders were closed at the time. A lot of these banks required me to physically show up and have a social number, which I didn't have at the time. So tip number one, hire yourself a good immigration lawyer. This made the process so much simpler and so much faster had I done it all on my own. They were able to walk me through a lot of these common pitfalls. They were actually instrumental in submitting and collecting all the documentation that was required to get this visa. Next up, I wanted to talk about the tax implications of moving to the US. Let me first start off by saying I am not a tax professional, and if there is anything that I hope you can get out of this video is to please hire yourself a good CPA. That is where I made most of my mistakes. At the time, I hired a CPA in Canada who said that he was very familiar with cross-border implications. However, he knew absolutely nothing. He was a great bullshitter. And I believed him because I was young, I was naive, and this mistake alone cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars, literally. However, as I was just saying, in order to get the E2 visa, you have to open a business in the US. So me not knowing anything, I decided to open an LLC in the US. At that time, I had no idea what a pass-through entity was. I should have done my research. I just knew that everybody in the US always talked about LLCs. So I opened an LLC. In Canada, it's very different, our different corporate structures. So I opened this LLC and I started slowly shifting all of my clients that I had in my Canadian corporation over to my US LLC. And I was still living in Quebec. And remember, high marginal tax rate, 53.5%. Anything that I was making in the business automatically passed through to my personal side, where I was getting that 53.5% tax rate. And then this is again where I literally cannot believe I made this mistake. But on top of that 53.5% tax rate, there is a 17% tax on top of that when you are operating an LLC as a foreigner. Again, me being in Canada, operating a US LLC. So my marginal tax rates were sitting somewhere at 73%. Incredible. And then add in the complexity of the fact that I was still running my Canadian corporation. I still had some clients in my Canadian corporation. And then on top of that, running my US LLC, it was an absolute nightmare. And I should have brought in professionals way, way sooner. If there's anything that I can suggest, is that you hire a cross-border advisor, somebody who specializes in cross-border accounting, taxes, legal structure. And then finally, something else that literally had never even crossed my mind was the fact that there is an exit tax when you leave Canada. Any assets that you possess at the time of your exit, you are taxed on that. Of course, like Canada wants to get any of that last little bit of tax money before you depart. So that was a little bit of a surprise too. Finally, I was granted my US visa. It took about 6 months, and had I not hired those immigration lawyers, I'm sure it would have taken a lot longer. So next up, I had to decide which city, or which state rather, I was going to move to. I had a list of criterias that I was looking for in where I lived. So number one, it had to be low tax. Again, I was in one of the highest tax states, or provinces rather, in North America. I wanted to go somewhere that was very low tax. Number two, cheap cost of living. I wanted to be able to live like a king and make a tech salary. Number three, thriving economy and very friendly to business. That was so important. And I've made some mistakes here. And then number four, and this is probably the most important, not something that I realized at first, but now I realize, is having good people around you. So critical. So first off, I wanted to try out Florida. The reason being was that Florida was one of the few states that remained open during the pandemic. So of course I wanted to go to Florida. In fact, that's where I originally opened my business. That's where I opened my business bank accounts. However, I spent a few weeks in Miami and I quickly realized that that was not a good city to run a business. That is a party city. That was a huge no. Next up, I tried Tampa for a few weeks, and Tampa was just not much going on. It just seemed, no offense to anybody who lives in Tampa, but it seems a little boring. After that, I tried out LA. And again, I know what you're thinking. You were looking for low cost of living, low tax. Unfortunately, I made the mistake. I met a girl who was from California and I moved out there, and that just didn't end up working. After that, I tried out Las Vegas. And Las Vegas actually checked off a lot of those boxes. So Nevada was a no state tax. It was cheap cost of living. It was a thriving economy, however, not for the field that I am in, which is tech. And the last one that I just told you was so important, is I needed to be around good people. And unfortunately, that last one, Vegas, again, no offense to anybody who's from Vegas, but those were just not my people. I had a really good friend in Austin who actually recommended I moved out there. I had traveled a lot for business to Texas, and I always loved Texas. Something about the people, something about the Southern hospitality. I just couldn't get enough of Texas. However, when I went over to Austin, I didn't find that it was that classic Texas Southern hospitality that I was used to. Austin at the time was a lot of transplants coming over from California, so I just didn't get that feel. And Austin was so high cost of living. The price of a home, of rent, had skyrocketed in the last couple of years. Apparently, I missed out on the good years in Austin. So needless to say, Austin didn't work for me either. And then finally, I was about to move to Dallas because, again, I'd spent a lot of time in Dallas. I had a few friends in Dallas, but I was like, you know what the heck? I'll try out Houston. I kind of heard mixed reviews about Houston, but oh man, was I wrong. Houston is one of my absolute favorite cities. There is so much to discover in Houston, and it checked every single box. low tax, cheap cost of living, a thriving economy, and so many industries that I'm looking to break into: medical, oil and gas. There's just so much going on here. And oh my God, the people here are amazing. And Houston is one of those cities where if you just visit for a weekend, you likely won't think much of it. In fact, when I first moved there, I was like, yeah. But the longer I stayed there and the more I explored this city, the more I was blown away. I've been here for almost 7 months and I am still exploring new neighborhoods, discovering new places. It is a great city, and I'm so happy to now call this place my home. To finish this video, I wanted to take a quick look at what my motivators were 3 years ago versus how they've changed over the last couple of years. If there's one thing that I've realized about money, it's that money is meant to grant you freedom. The freedom to live where you want. If you are simply making a decision to live somewhere just to avoid taxes, to save money, that just doesn't make sense to me. At least not now. At the time, that was one of my high motivators. And you could absolutely become a multi-millionaire in Canada. There are plenty of wealthy people in Canada or other countries that have high taxes. Canada has some great investment and tax savings account. There's the TFSA, there's the RRSP, which are both great accounts that I think actually surpass some of the 401ks and the Roth IRAs that we have here in the US. Also, another one of my motivations was the pandemic. Well, sure enough, the pandemic ended and things went back to normal. So that wasn't a great motivator either. However, if there's one thing that I've realized from moving to the US and that I would highly recommend, is that I am now with like-minded individuals, people with the same level of drive, the same level of motivation that unfortunately, not saying it doesn't exist in Canada, but I just didn't see as much of it in Canada. I am also with people who are way, way ahead of me, and I have so much to learn from them. So realistically, if there was one good reason to move to a different city, a different state, or even a different country, is to build up that network, to be around like-minded individuals, and to continue to grow. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, please reach out. I'd be happy to help you out on your journey. And if anything, hopefully I can help you out from making some of the mistakes that I made.